Don't touch me, I'm dying. Mountain man gasped, but fat, obese girl refused to listen. The winter storm of 1878 came down the spine of the Rocky Mountains like a living beast. Wind screamed through the pines, hurling sheets of white across the Wyoming-Montana borderlands. The sky had no shape, no horizon, only the endless churn of snow swallowing everything in its path. Serafina Harper pushed through the storm, each step sinking nearly to her knees. The cold gnawed at her bones, slipping through the torn seams of the thin coat she clutched around her round frame. She was 28, soft-bodied, gentle-faced, a woman who had spent her life apologizing for taking up space. 3 days earlier, her father had sold her to a wealthy old widower who wanted a quiet, obedient companion. She had fled Blackwater in the night, choosing death in the mountains over life in that man's house. Her breath came out in ragged gasps. She whispered to the storm as if confessing, "If this is where I die, at least it's my choice." Then she heard it, faint at first, nearly swallowed by the wind. A groan, a man's voice, strained and broken. She stopped, heart pounding. "Hello? Is someone there?" 10 steps ahead, half buried in snow, lay a giant of a man. His coat, thick, grisly hide, was torn open across the chest. Blood soaked the white drifts in a shocking burst of red. His face was pale beneath a frozen beard, his long black hair crusted with ice. Deep claw marks carved across his shoulder and ribs. Serafina dropped to her knees beside him. "Sir, can you hear me?" His eyes opened slowly, storm-gray and fading. He tried to raise a hand, but barely moved. His voice rasped from somewhere deep in his chest. "Don't touch me. I'm dying." She shook her head fiercely. "You're hurt. I can help." "No," he coughed, blood staining his beard. Grizzly tore into me. Infection already spreading. My blood's poisoned now. If you touch me, you'll die too. Go." The wind howled over them, tugging at her hair. Snow stung her cheeks, but she leaned closer, refusing to move away. "I'm not leaving you," she said, voice trembling but certain. "Not out here, not like this." He tried to push her hand away, but his strength failed. Cabin, north, 1/2 mile, but you can't. I'm too heavy. You'll never make it." She slid her arm beneath his shoulders. "Tell me your name," she said. Ezekiel Stone." "I'm Serafina," she answered softly, "and I'm not letting you die in this snow." Outside, the storm raged, but inside her chest, something stubborn and fierce ignited, stronger than fear, stronger than the cold. The journey to salvation had begun. The wind clawed at Serafina's face as she hauled Ezekiel upright, his weight nearly pulling her down. He towered over her, well over 6 feet, built like the mountains that framed the valley, but now he leaned against her like a collapsing tree. His breath rattled in his chest, hot against the icy air. "Serafina," he whispered, each syllable trembling, "this is madness. You should run from me, not carry me." But she did not answer. She tightened her grip around his waist, forcing him to lean on her as she dragged him forward through the drifts. Every step sent fire up her legs, but she kept going, leaning into the wind with a determination she had never known she possessed. The blizzard erased the world around them. No trees, no sky, only swirling white and the faint sound of Ezekiel's labored breathing. She focused on that sound, holding on to it as if it were a rope, pulling her in the right direction. "North," he murmured, voice fading. "The cabin's north." She lifted her head. There was no north, only the storm. But she trusted him. She pushed forward, angling herself toward the direction his trembling hand pointed. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Ezekiel grew heavier with every passing moment. Several times his knees buckled, sending them both crashing into the snow. Each time she clawed her way back up, sobbing quietly, but refusing to stop. At some point, he began to mutter words she didn't understand. "Sarah, sweetheart, don't go in the water. Daddy's here. I'm here." Seraphina froze. His voice cracked with such raw, broken sorrow that it sliced straight into her chest. He wasn't talking to her. He was talking to a ghost. His daughter. She brushed ice from his cheek. "Ezekiel, stay with me. I need you to tell me more. What happened to Sarah?" His eyes fluttered open, just barely. "She was only 6. Fever took her. Couldn't save her." Seraphina swallowed hard, her throat tightening. "You're going to tell me the whole story when we get you home. Do you hear me? But first, you have to stay awake." "Home," he whispered. "I don't have one." She pressed her forehead briefly to his shoulder. "You will." They moved again, step by agonizing step. Her muscles screamed, her fingers numb, her breath shallow and burning. More than once she thought she would fall and never rise again. But each time she felt him slipping further into darkness, and that fear kept her upright. After what felt like an hour, though it might have been 20 minutes or 3, she saw it. A shadow in the blizzard, a crooked outline, a shape that did not sway with the wind. A cabin. "Ezekiel," she gasped, tears freezing on her lashes. "I found it. We made it." He didn't answer. His head slumped forward. "No." She shook him desperately. "Don't you dare leave me now." She half-dragged, half-carried him the final yards, stumbling onto the wooden porch. The cabin door was frozen shut, but she threw her shoulder against it until it burst open with a crack. The smell of old wood and cold air hit her face. Inside, darkness. She pulled him in, the weight nearly crushing her. Snow and blood pooled on the floorboards as she lowered him onto the rough bed by the far wall. Her breaths came in ragged, staggering pulls. The hearth was cold, but the cabin had everything she needed. Firewood stacked along the wall, a pot, a knife, a half-full bottle of whiskey. She moved through the space with frantic purpose. Within minutes, flames crackled to life in the fireplace, throwing golden light across Ezekiel's battered body. His wounds were worse in the light. Deep, jagged claw marks carved through muscle, still bleeding, the edges swollen and angry. Infection had already set in. He was right about that. Seraphina stared at the damage, her stomach twisting. She had never treated wounds this severe, but the thought of losing him, this stranger she should have walked past, felt unbearable. She wiped her eyes. "I won't let you die. Do you hear me?" He stirred, barely conscious, whispering something like a plea. "Don't touch me." But she already had the kettle on the fire, already had the knife heating in the flames, already had snow melting into clean water. She worked quickly, her hands trembling but steady enough to do what had to be done. She cleaned the wounds with scalding water, whispered apologies every time he cried out. She poured whiskey over the gashes, her tears falling onto his skin. "You're going to live," she whispered, "even if you think you shouldn't, even if you think your blood is poison." He did not answer. He couldn't. She worked long into the night, refusing to slow, refusing to yield, refusing to accept the idea that the mountains were meant to claim him. When she finally sat beside him, Her hands covered in dried blood, Ezekiel's breathing had steadied, just barely. Seraphina took his hand gently. "You're safe now," she whispered, but deep down she knew this was only the beginning. The first night passed in a blur of fever and trembling breath. Ezekiel drifted in and out of consciousness, while Seraphina stayed at his side, her back aching from bending over him for hours. The storm outside pummeled the cabin walls, but inside she built a fortress of firelight, determination, and stubborn hope. At dawn, his fever spiked. Sweat soaked the blanket she had wrapped around him, yet his skin burned beneath her touch. He muttered words she couldn't understand, sometimes names, sometimes broken apologies, sometimes nothing but pain drawn into sound. Seraphina brushed damp hair from his brow. "You're going to get through this," she whispered. "I survived what they did to me. You'll survive this." But by the end of the first day, she feared she had lied. His breaths grew ragged. His body arched in agony when the infection surged. Pus seeped from the wound she had cleaned the night before. She boiled more water. She sterilized the knife again. When she cut away the newly dead flesh, her hands shook, but she forced them still. She had no other choice. No one was coming, and if she failed, he would die. That night, Ezekiel began speaking to ghosts. "Sarah, don't run near the river. Daddy's here." His voice broke like brittle glass. Seraphina's eyes filled with tears. She wrapped both arms around his shoulders, whispering, "She knew you loved her. She knew it." He didn't hear her. He sank deeper. On the second day, his fever worsened so sharply that she feared he would never wake again. She used every scrap of cloth in the cabin to cool him. She forced water past his cracked lips, murmuring prayers she hadn't spoken since childhood. "Lord, don't take him, not this man, not this way." She didn't know why she cared so fiercely. Maybe because she saw her own kind of brokenness reflected in him. Maybe because he had been marked by life the same way she had, wounded in places no one else could see. Maybe because she had never saved anyone before, or maybe because she was desperately lonely and he was the first person she had met in years who didn't look at her like a burden or an object. Whatever the reason, she refused to let him go. The third day arrived with brittle sunlight creeping through cracks in the wooden shutters. Ezekiel lay still, too still. His breathing had softened into a faint whisper, barely there. She leaned close. "Ezekiel, Ezekiel, wake up." Nothing. Her heart hammered painfully. She took his hand, large, calloused, still warm. She squeezed. "You're not alone," she said, voice cracking. "You hear me? I'm right here. I stayed. I'm not leaving." His eyelids flickered, barely, then closed again. But for Seraphina, that flicker was enough to ignite fresh determination. She made broth from dried meat in his pantry. She mashed it into paste and coaxed it into his mouth. She sang softly, old hymns her mother had once hummed while brushing her hair. Something about the familiar melody calmed her hands as she worked. On the fourth night, the fever finally broke. It didn't happen all at once. No miracle moment, just a slow easing, a gentling of breath, the shaking of his limbs fading little by little. Seraphina felt the change before she saw it, as if the air around him shifted. She laid her palm against his cheek. Cooler, not cold, but cooler. "Thank God," she whispered, closing her eyes. "Thank God." She slumped forward then, placing her head on the edge of the bed. Exhaustion crashed over her so hard she thought she might collapse entirely. For days she had fought sleep like an enemy. Now Her body refused to move. She drifted, not quite asleep, not quite awake, watching the fire in the hearth burn lower. Every time her eyes slid shut, she jerked back awake, panic flooding her chest. If he needed her, she would be there. On the morning of the 5th day, she woke to the sound of a strained inhale. She lifted her head slowly, afraid to hope too soon. Ezekiel's eyes were open, not wide, not bright, but open, and watching her with a mixture of confusion and something softer, something fragile. His voice was a rasp. "You're still here." She nodded, her throat tightening. "I told you I wouldn't leave." He blinked, struggling to make sense of the light, the cabin, her face. "How long?" "5 days," she whispered. "5 nights." He looked at her gently, as though trying to understand a puzzle that didn't belong in this world. "You saved my life." Serafina leaned close, her voice trembling with truth. "No, I refuse to let you lose it." For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, the storm had passed. Inside, the fire crackled softly. And in the stillness between two broken souls, something warm and quiet began to take root, fragile as new snow, yet determined to survive. A beginning neither of them had expected. The morning Ezekiel truly opened his eyes, the cabin felt different, warmer somehow. Not because the fire burned brighter, but because, for the first time since she had dragged him through the blizzard, Serafina no longer felt like she was fighting the mountains alone. He lay still, studying her with a quiet intensity. His voice was rough when he finally spoke. "You stayed, even when I told you not to touch me." She smiled, small, tired, but real. "I told you, I don't listen very well." A faint, hoarse chuckle escaped him. The sound surprised them both. Then the work of healing began. For the next several days, Serafina kept the routine she had built during his fever, but now it was easier, because Ezekiel was conscious, because he could answer, because he could help in tiny ways that made her feel less alone. She cleaned his wounds, replaced the bandages, fed him broth and pieces of soft bread. Though every task still demanded effort, the fear that had wrapped itself around her chest loosened. Yet she soon discovered that caring for a man awake was different from caring for a man barely clinging to life. Ezekiel Stone was quiet, watchful, thoughtful. He didn't speak much, but when he did, it was with intention. And each time he looked at her, she felt the weight of his gaze, not judgment, not pity, but a kind of curious respect she wasn't used to receiving from anyone. On the 2nd day of his recovery, he tried to sit up on his own. She hurried to his side. "Careful! You'll reopen the wounds." He gritted his teeth as he eased himself against the wall. "If I don't move, I'll get weaker, and I can't afford that, not out here." She folded her arms, trying to look stern. "You're not doing anything without me there to help." His eyes crinkled with a faint smile. "Then I suppose I'm safe." For a moment, neither moved. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was warm, like the hush before a shared secret. Over the next week, the cabin became a small world with its own gentle rhythms. Serafina lit the fire each morning. She swept the floor with a bundle of dried sage she found behind the door. She boiled water for tea, chopped vegetables she discovered in Ezekiel's winter store, and learned to use his old cast-iron pot to cook stews thick enough to feed a mountain man twice his size. She wasn't used to being in a place where she was allowed to do things slowly, gently. In Blackwater, she had always hurried, always trying to be quieter, take up less space. avoid angering the people who judged her. But here, in the hush of the wilderness, she discovered a kind of peace she hadn't known she was missing. As she worked, Ezekiel watched her, not in the way men in town used to stare, mocking, appraising, dismissing, but with a steady warmth that made her chest flutter. When she cooked, he looked grateful. When she spoke softly about nothing in particular, the way snow fell differently in the mountains than it did in town, the way she used to dream of a life where she got to choose her own path, he listened, truly listened. One afternoon, after she helped him sit outside to feel the sun on his face, he finally asked, "Why did you run? From Blackwater?" She swallowed, her hands tightening around the edge of the blanket she had placed over his lap. "My father sold me to an old widower. I was supposed to be his companion." Ezekiel's jaw tightened. "Against your will?" "Yes," she whispered. He looked out at the trees, the muscles in his jaw working. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled with anger he didn't bother to hide. "A man who would sell his daughter isn't a father." Her eyes filled with tears. She tried to blink them away, but Ezekiel turned his head and saw. "Seraphina," he said gently, "nobody deserves what was done to you." She looked down at her hands. "They said I should be grateful anyone wanted me, because of the way I look." A long silence. Then Ezekiel said quietly, "The way you look saved my life." She looked up sharply, shocked. He held her gaze. "You're strong. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." The words hit her like a stone cast into still water, slow ripples spreading deep. No one had ever said such a thing to her, certainly not a man like him. After that, something shifted between them. When she handed him a cup of tea, his fingers brushed hers, slowly, deliberately. When she checked his bandages, he watched her with a softness that felt almost reverent. When he struggled to stand for the first time, she wrapped an arm around his waist, her cheek brushing his shoulder. The closeness sent a warm shiver through her, and she felt his breath pause, just for a moment, before he settled into the support she offered. They spent evenings by the fire talking in low voices. Ezekiel told her about the valley before winter, the places he trapped in the warmer months, the recipes his late wife used to make. There was sorrow in the way he spoke of Mary and Sarah, but also something else, something healing, as though sharing those memories with her softened the ache. And Seraphina found herself sharing parts of herself she had always kept hidden. How she used to dream of being a midwife, how she liked to collect smooth stones from riverbanks, how she had once hoped to find someone who looked at her like she mattered. One night, when the fire cast warm gold across the wooden walls, Ezekiel said quietly, "You're safe here." Her breath trembled. "I feel safe, for the first time in my life." He nodded, staring into the flames. "Good. That's what this cabin is for." But when he looked at her, the meaning in his eyes said something different, something deeper, something neither of them dared name yet, not aloud. But it grew, night after night, as certain and steady as the fire in the hearth. Spring crept slowly into the mountains, brushing the valley with hints of green, while pockets of snow still clung to shadows beneath the fir trees. Inside the cabin, warmth and routine had woven themselves into something that felt almost like a shared life. Ezekiel was strong enough to stand without help, though he still moved carefully, one hand pressed to his healing ribs. Seraphina spent her mornings cooking or gathering firewood, her evenings beside the hearth, stitching torn blankets or reading from a worn Bible she had found on a shelf. But beneath the quiet, something trembled, old wounds that neither of them had fully spoken of, and dangers that did not disappear simply because the snow had melted. One late afternoon, as Seraphina prepared stew, she noticed Ezekiel staring at the door, jaw clenched, eyes narrowed, as if listening for footsteps that weren't there. "Ezekiel," she asked softly, "is something wrong?" He didn't look away from the window. "I saw tracks this morning. Horses, more than one." Her heart stuttered. Outlaws? Trappers? Maybe, maybe not. He took a slow breath, wincing slightly. But they rode in from the east, from the direction of Blackwater. Her hands tightened around the spoon. "My father," she whispered. Ezekiel turned to her, eyes full of concern. "Seraphina, a man like him doesn't give up something he thinks he owns." She looked down at the stew simmering in the pot. "I'm not something to own." He stepped closer, his voice steady. "You never were." But even as he said the words, she could see a shadow settle over his face, something deeper than worry for her safety, something he had been hiding since the night he woke from fever. She walked to him slowly. "Ezekiel, there's more, isn't there? Something you haven't told me." He hesitated. His breath caught, just slightly. Then he nodded. "There is." He sank onto the edge of the bed, rubbing a hand over his beard as though bracing himself. Seraphina sat in the chair across from him, hands folded in her lap, waiting. "When my wife died," he began, voice low, "I left everything, my home, my work, every person I ever knew. I came here to disappear. I thought if I lived far enough into the wilderness, the guilt wouldn't follow." Her voice was barely a whisper. "But it did." He nodded. "It always does." She rose and sat beside him, placing her hand over his. "Tell me." And so he did. He told her about the winter 10 years ago when his daughter Sarah fell ill with scarlet fever, how the nearest doctor demanded more money than he had, how he rode for help until his horse collapsed, only to return and find Sarah dying in her mother's arms. Mary, unable to bear the grief, grew sick soon after. Ezekiel spent months tending to her, trying to force his own hope into her fragile body, only to watch her fade like smoke. "I buried them both on the same morning," he whispered, "and something inside me died that day, too." Seraphina felt tears sting her eyes. "I'm so sorry." He shook his head. "I didn't tell you this for pity. I just needed you to know why I didn't fight that bear the way I should have. Part of me was ready for the mountains to finish what life had started." She reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. "But you didn't die. You fought, and I found you." His gaze softened, lingering on her face. "Yes," he said quietly, "you did." For a moment, the cabin seemed to hold its breath, the silence thick with words neither of them quite dared to speak. But the peace shattered when they heard the distant crack of a branch outside. Ezekiel rose instantly despite the ache in his body, grabbing the rifle hanging near the door. Seraphina stood behind him, heart hammering against her ribs. "Stay close," he murmured. They waited in tense silence. Minutes dragged. Then footsteps, slow, heavy, purposeful. Someone or several someones were circling the cabin. Seraphina's breath trembled. "Ezekiel, if it's my father." His voice was calm, but she heard the steel beneath it. Then he made the biggest fool's decision of his life. The footsteps paused. A low voice called out, "Stone, we know you're in there." Ezekiel's face darkened. "I know that voice." "Who is it?" she whispered. He exhaled slowly. "Cornelius Sawyer, the man your father sold you to?" Her stomach twisted. "No." The voice outside grew louder. "Hand her over, Stone. She belongs to me. Her father signed her to me fair and legal. You're harboring stolen property." Serafina felt her throat close. "Property?" she whispered. Ezekiel's expression hardened. "You're not property. Not to him. Not to anyone." Another voice joined Cornelius's, her father's, sharp and angry. "Serafina, come out this instant. You've shamed me enough." Tears filled her eyes, but anger flared hotter. "I'm not going back. I'd rather die." Ezekiel placed a hand on the small of her back, grounding her. "You're not dying today," he murmured, "but they might be if they push me." Outside, horses snorted. Boots crunched in the snow. Cornelius shouted again, "Last chance, Stone. Surrender her now, or we'll take her by force." Ezekiel stepped closer to the door. "You can try," he said, voice low and lethal, "but you won't like what happens." Serafina grabbed his arm. "There are too many." He turned to her, eyes burning. "I won't let them take you." Her breath caught. "Why?" A pause, the kind that stretched into something electric. His answer came like a confession he could no longer bury. "Because you're the first person I've wanted to live for since Mary and Sarah died." Her heart trembled. "Ezekiel!" Before either could say more, the first shot rang out, splintering the window beside the door. Serafina cried out. Ezekiel pulled her behind the table, shielding her with his body. The battle for her freedom had begun. The first gunshot ripped through the cabin wall, sending splinters flying. Serafina flinched, but Ezekiel's arm came around her instantly, pulling her down behind the overturned table. Dust and wood chips settled around them like shaken snow. Outside, Cornelius shouted, "Stone, that was a warning shot. The next one goes through your heart." Ezekiel lowered his voice to a steady whisper. "Stay behind me, no matter what happens." Serafina gripped his coat. "You're still hurt." "I'm hurt," he said, loading a fresh round into the rifle. "Not dead." Boots crunched through the thin layer of melting snow outside. Multiple pairs. 3, 4, maybe more. Her father's voice cut through the air like a knife. "Serafina, come out and stop causing trouble. You belong to Cornelius now. You embarrassed me in front of half the town." Her hands trembled, but not with fear. This time, with fury. "I'm not an object," she whispered. "I'm not a debt to be traded." Ezekiel looked at her, really looked, and something fierce sparked in his eyes. "No," he said, "you're not, and no one's taking you from this cabin." Another shot blasted through the window frame. Ezekiel aimed through the broken glass and fired once. A shout echoed outside. Someone fell. Cornelius cursed loudly. "You'll pay for that, Stone." "Come collect," Ezekiel muttered. The next moments unfolded in flashes of violence and breathless silence. A man rushed the front door. Ezekiel shot him before he made it to the porch. Another circled around the back. Ezekiel waited, tracking the shadow through the cracks in the wall. When the man kicked the rear entrance, Ezekiel met him with the butt of the rifle, knocking him unconscious in one bone-crunching blow. But there were too many. Serafina could hear them whispering, spreading out, regrouping, planning to rush all sides at once. Ezekiel wiped blood from his brow. Whether his or theirs, she couldn't tell. "You can't fight them alone," she whispered fiercely. He turned to her, breathing hard. "I'm not fighting alone. I'm fighting for you." Her throat closed. "Ezekiel." Before she could say more, the front door burst open. Cornelius Sawyer stepped in first, pistol raised. Serafina froze. The world seemed to shrink around that doorway, her past, her fear, every humiliation she had endured standing there in the shape of one man. "Little runaway," Cornelius sneered. "Look at you, hiding behind this wild animal like he's your husband." Ezekiel stood tall despite his injury. "Leave before I bury you in your own greed." Cornelius cocked the hammer. "Hand her over." Ezekiel moved, so fast Serafina barely saw it. He stepped in front of her, shielding her completely. Cornelius fired. The bullet clipped Ezekiel's upper arm, spinning him back. Serafina screamed, grabbing him before he fell. Rage exploded up her spine, hot and blinding. "Stop!" she shouted. Cornelius turned toward her just as she snatched Ezekiel's hunting revolver from the table. Her hand shook, but her aim did not. "You hurt him again," she said, voice steady despite the tears, "and I swear I'll shoot." Cornelius laughed. "You? A woman like you?" She fired. The bullet struck his hand, sending his gun flying. He screamed, stumbling backward onto the porch. Shock rippled across the men outside. Ezekiel gritted his teeth against the pain. "Good shot." More gunfire erupted behind Cornelius, but not toward the cabin. Voices, orders, boots, federal marshals. Ezekiel sagged against her. "They're here. I wrote to them last month. Reported your father. Reported Sawyer." Cornelius and Silas Harper bolted toward their horses, but the marshals overtook them in seconds. Screams, curses, the clatter of dropped weapons. Then silence. Serafina stared out the broken doorway, chest heaving. It was over. Truly over. Ezekiel leaned into her, his breath unsteady. "You saved me," he murmured. She held him tighter. "You saved me first." He looked at her with something raw and unguarded. "I'd do it again." She touched his cheek. "I know." And for the first time, she believed the mountains were no longer the wilderness between two broken souls, but the place where they had finally begun to heal. When the dust finally settled and the last marshal rode out of the valley with Cornelius and Silas Harper in chains, a heavy stillness fell over the mountains. Not the frightening silence of a storm's eye, but the gentle quiet that comes after danger has passed, when the world exhales and begins to breathe again. Serafina swept the broken glass from the doorway while Ezekiel rested in the rocking chair near the fire, his wounded arm wrapped in fresh bandages. Every so often he watched her, as if reassuring himself she was truly there, that she hadn't vanished with the chaos. "You should sit," he murmured when she gathered another handful of shattered wood. "You've done enough for one lifetime." She shook her head with a soft smile. "I've rested enough in fear. Now I want to move." He watched her for a long moment before saying quietly, "You're braver than anyone ever gave you credit for." She looked back at him, surprised by the warmth in his tone. "And you're gentler than you pretend to be." A faint smile tugged at his mouth, small but real. Only with people worth being gentle for. Her heartbeat fluttered. The cabin felt warmer than it ever had, not from the fire, not from the stew simmering on the stove, but from the simple presence of two people who had learned, through blood, sorrow, and courage, that they could trust one another with the scars they carried. They spent the next days repairing the damage. Serafina hammered loose boards back into place. Ezekiel, despite her protests, helped as much as his healing arm allowed. By the end of the week, the cabin stood stronger than before, patched with new wood, new nails, and the stubborn devotion of two people who had nearly lost each other. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and turned the sky gold, Seraphina stepped out to gather water. When she returned, she found Ezekiel standing by the hearth, holding something small in his hand. "Seraphina," he said, his voice low. She stopped, the bucket handle slipping slightly in her grip. "Yes?" He stepped toward her, the fire casting warm light over the lines of his face. "I don't know if I can promise the world. I've lost too much to pretend I'm whole, but I can promise this cabin, this valley, this life." Her breath caught. He opened his hand. A simple silver ring lay on his palm, old, worn smooth, but beautifully kept. "My wife's ring," he said softly. "I've held onto it for 10 years, waiting for the day I might feel alive again." Her eyes filled. "Ezekiel, are you sure?" He nodded once. "You saved my life twice. You saved my heart without meaning to. If you'll have me, this place can be your home, and I can be whatever you need." Seraphina pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I want this life. I want you." He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. Outside the cabin, the mountains stretched far and wild, but inside, the world narrowed to one quiet truth. They had found something worth keeping. Stories born in the wilderness have a way of binding people together, no matter how far apart they live or how different their lives may be. Every time you return to hear another tale, you become part of that small circle of warmth, like sitting beside a fire that never quite goes out. If Seraphina and Ezekiel's journey found a place in your heart, I'd love to know. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Your voices, your cities, your countries, each one reminds me why these stories matter. If you still believe in love worth fighting for, stay close. The next story is already on its way. They stole my clothes. Please help. Fat Obese. 19-year-old begged, mountain man at lake. "Look at the fat pig. She's got nothing to cover herself now." Millicent Ashford's laughter cut through the warm summer air like a knife. Her voice bounced off the still surface of the forest lake outside Silver Ridge, Montana, and buried itself in the chest of the girl standing waist-deep in the water. Her name was Verity Winters, 19 years old, an orphan, a charity case at St. Mary's Relief Camp. She was the girl who scrubbed floors until her hands bled, who carried sacks of potatoes bigger than her own torso, who slept on splintered wood and woke up every morning to the sound of other girls laughing about how much space she took up in the world. Now she stood in the lake with nothing on, arms folded tight across her chest, skin prickling from more than just the breeze. She had slipped away here after a day of scrubbing pig pens and having a bucket of filthy water dumped over her hair for fun. All she'd wanted was 10 minutes alone, 10 minutes to wash off the stink and shame. She had chosen the most hidden spot she knew, tucked behind drooping willow branches and a jut of granite rock. She had folded her one brown dress, the last thing her mother had ever mended for her, into a neat square and laid it carefully on a flat stone with her worn leather shoes and thin cotton shawl. Then she had slid into the water and breathed for the first time all day. When she climbed out, dripping and shivering, the stone was bare, her dress, her shoes, her shawl, gone. Verity's heart crashed against her ribs. She spun around, water running down her calves, mud sucking at her bare feet. No, 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 no. Where are they? Please! Laughter exploded behind the willows. 5 girls stepped out, skirts swishing, ribbons and curls perfectly in place. Millicent in front, tall and elegant, the fallen merchant's daughter who still carried herself like a princess. Prudence, Charlotte, Abigail, and Constance clustered behind like a vicious little court. Millicent dangled Verity's brown dress from 2 fingers as if it were something diseased. "Looking for this?" she sang. "You should see your face, Winters. You look even more pathetic than usual." Prudence pointed, eyes glittering. "Look at her belly. It's like a sow ready to farrow." Charlotte snorted. "And those legs. I swear I've seen tree trunks smaller than that." Heat burned up Verity's throat. She crouched, trying to sink deeper into the water, arms hugging herself so hard her muscles shook. Tears blurred the girls into colorful smears on the shore. "Please," she whispered, "please give them back. I can't walk 3 miles back to camp like this. I can't let anyone see me." Millicent's smile sharpened. She dropped the dress into the wet mud, then ground her boot heel into it, twisting slowly until the fabric was a smeared, filthy mess. "That's the point, Verity. People should see you. Let them stare at what you really are, not a girl, just an animal that eats too much." The others shrieked with laughter. The shoes went flying into the deeper water with 2 careless flicks of the wrist. The shawl followed. When they finally turned and walked away, their ridicule echoing between the pines, the forest fell horribly quiet. Verity stumbled out of the lake, the cold air biting every inch of exposed skin. She snatched up the ruined dress, tried to shake the mud from it, then realized the fabric was torn where Millicent's heel had caught on a seam. It was barely more than a rag now. She sank to her knees in the damp earth, clutching the torn cloth to her chest. A sob tore loose, then another, until she was rocking herself, hair dripping, teeth chattering as the sun slid lower behind the ridge. "If I go back like this, they'll all laugh," she choked out to the empty trees. "If I stay, I'll freeze. I don't belong anywhere, not even in my own skin." Wind moved through the pines, lifting the loose strands of her wet hair. The first hint of evening chill slipped its fingers down her spine. Far off, a bird cried once, then fell silent. And then, just when Verity thought the world had finished abandoning her, she heard it, the steady, heavy thud of hooves on packed earth, drawing closer to the lake. Matthias Ironwood guided his black stallion through the thinning trees with the easy confidence of a man who had spent more years in the mountains than in any town. The late-day sun struck his shoulders in muted gold, catching in the deep brown fur of his bearskin coat and in the dark strands of hair brushing his jaw. He had just finished a successful hunt, fresh venison draped across his saddle, and was heading toward Silver Ridge to trade before nightfall. He wasn't expecting company. He certainly wasn't expecting to hear a sound like a wounded bird choking on its own breath. The man pulled lightly on the reins. The horse snorted, ears twitching toward the lake. Matthias listened again. There, thin, shaken, barely more than air, someone was crying. He dismounted without a word, footsteps silent on the pine needles as he followed the trembling sound around a boulder. And then he stopped. A girl, no, a young woman, sat curled on the muddy bank, wet hair clinging to her face, wrapped only in her arms and a ruined scrap of brown cloth. Her shoulders shook uncontrollably. Her bare feet were turning pale from the cold. Matthias swallowed hard and immediately turned his gaze away, fixing it on a distant treetop. "Miss," he said quietly, voice deep but careful, "I apologize for approaching. Are you injured?" Verity startled so violently she nearly toppled sideways. She grabbed the torn dress against her chest, breath catching. No. I mean, yes, no. Please don't look at me." "I'm not looking," he said evenly, already turning his back fully. "I wouldn't disrespect you that way." His tone, steady, warm in its restraint, made Verity's throat tighten. She'd forgotten what it felt like for someone to speak to her as though she were worth gentleness. Matthias knelt, still facing the opposite direction. "Miss, do you have clothing nearby?" A pause, the sound of a breath breaking. They stole it, all of it." His jaw flexed. "Who?" Her answer came in broken pieces. "The girls at St. Mary's. Millicent, Prudence, Charlotte, Abigail, Constance. They took everything. They made me come out of the water and laughed. They said—" Her words dissolved. "They said things I wish I could forget." Matthias closed his eyes for a long moment, mastering the anger climbing his spine. He had seen cruelty, bandits, drifters, outlaws, but there was a colder kind of viciousness in people who harmed someone defenseless purely for the pleasure of it. He rose to his feet. "I'm going to take off my coat. I'll place it beside you. I'll stay turned away the whole time. When you're covered, tell me." Verity's breath hitched. Why are you helping me?" "Because no one should be left alone like this," he said simply. He shrugged off his heavy fur-lined coat. The warmth of it escaped into the cool evening air, revealing the wide breadth of his shoulders beneath a worn leather vest. He lowered the coat to the ground and nudged it backward with his boot, so it slid toward her without him turning. Verity crawled forward, trembling hands dragging the enormous coat into her lap. It swallowed her when she pulled it on, soft, warm, smelling faintly of pine smoke and leather. The weight of it settled over her like a safety she had forgotten existed. I've put it on," she whispered. Matthias turned. For a moment he simply looked, at the way the coat enveloped her, at the tear stains on her cheeks, at the humiliation carved into her posture. But he saw something else, too, the fragile dignity she was still trying to hold on to despite everything. He stooped so he wasn't towering over her. "What's your name?" "Verity. Verity Winters." He nodded once. "Matthias Ironwood." Her eyes widened a fraction. "People in town, they talk about you. They say you live alone in the high ridge, that you fought bears." Matthias gave a faint, almost embarrassed huff of breath. "Only when they gave me no choice." A tiny, shaky laugh escaped her, her first in months. Matthias's expression softened. "Can you walk, Verity?" Her lower lip quivered. "Not far. My feet, they hurt. And I can't go back to camp like this. They'll mock me more. They always do." His hands curled into fists at his sides. "No one's mocking you again, not after I've heard what they did." She shook her head quickly. "Please don't confront them. They'll only make it worse." "Not for you," he said, voice deepening. "I'll see to that." Before she could argue, he moved closer, slowly, deliberately, to avoid startling her. "I'm going to lift you onto my horse. Is that all right?" Her breath trembled. No one had ever asked her permission for anything. "Yes, all right." Matthias slid one arm behind her shoulders, the other beneath her knees. He lifted her as though she weighed almost nothing, careful not to let the coat slip. Verity gasped softly, not from pain, but from the shock of being held gently, respectfully. He set her sideways on the saddle, then mounted behind her, creating a protective wall of warmth around her thin, draped body. He adjusted the coat, so it covered her legs completely. "Lean back if you need support. I've got you." Verity hesitated, then allowed herself to rest lightly against his chest. The world felt less sharp that way. Matthias clicked his tongue, guiding the stallion into a slow walk along the forest path. "I'm taking you to my cabin. You'll be safe there for tonight. We'll figure out tomorrow when you're warm and fed." Verity closed her eyes. She didn't know where her life was heading now, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was falling. The stallion's hooves kept a steady rhythm on the forest floor, the sound echoing through the towering pines as dusk settled around them. Verity sat wrapped in Matthias's heavy coat, pressed lightly against his chest, feeling the warmth radiating from him as the wind grew colder. Every breath she took carried the scent of leather, wood smoke, and pine, a scent she already knew she would never forget. Matthias kept one hand steady on the reins, the other braced gently at her waist to keep her balanced. He didn't crowd her. He didn't grip too tightly. His touch was firm only in the way that reassured her she wouldn't fall. "Are you warm enough?" he asked quietly behind her ear. "Yes," she whispered, surprised that it was true. "Your coat, it's very warm." "It served me well," he said. "Tonight, it's yours." Verity's throat tightened. No one had ever given her anything of value before, let alone something that felt like protection itself. They rode deeper into the mountains, the slope rising gradually. The sky above the treetops bled into indigo as the first evening stars began to appear. Pines whispered in the breeze, their tips swaying like dark silhouettes against the fading light. Far off, a lone wolf howled, the sound low and haunting. Verity tensed. Matthias felt it immediately. "He's far away," he murmured, voice steady. "And even if he weren't, he wouldn't come near us, not with the scent of horse gunpowder and fresh venison." She exhaled shakily. I've never been out here at night." "It can be frightening the first time," he admitted, "but the mountains don't harm without cause. People are often crueler than the wilderness." His words settled over her like a truth she had lived her whole life without realizing. They continued upward, crossing a narrow ridge path where the trees grew thicker. Branches arched overhead like a natural cathedral, filtering the moonlight into silver ribbons that flickered across Verity's bare feet, now tucked safely beneath the coat. After several minutes of silence, she spoke, her voice small. "You're very kind to me. You don't even know me." Matthias's voice was low, thoughtful. "I know enough. I heard your cry. I saw what they left you with. Nothing but fear. That tells me the rest." "But what if they're right about me?" she blurted before she could stop herself. "What if I really am all the things they say? Fat, ugly, worthless?" Matthias drew in a slow breath, and she felt the rise of his chest behind her. "Verity," he said softly but firmly, "you're none of those things. They insult you to distract from their own emptiness." "You don't know that. I do. I've seen enough people in my life to tell the difference between cruelty and truth. You've been working to survive, doing the jobs no one else will do, and still you endure. That's strength, not ugliness." Her eyes stung. She blinked hard. "No one has ever spoken to me like that." His tone deepened with sincerity. "Then they've all been blind." The path widened as they approached a clearing. Below them stretched a wide valley, dark and vast, dotted with shadows of boulders and low brush. The moon had risen fully now, its pale light glinting on the twisting river far below. "It's beautiful," Verity breathed. Matthias guided the horse to a stop so she could take it in. "This is why I live here," he said, "up in the high ridges, away from noise and lies." Verity turned slightly, not enough to face him, but enough that her voice trembled closer to his. "Do you live alone?" "I do," Matthias answered, "for 5 years now." "Why?" For a long moment he didn't answer. Only the wind spoke, brushing through the needles overhead. Finally he said, "The world took my family from me. Up here, the grief is quieter." Verity's heart tightened in her chest. She sensed the rawness beneath his words, a wound not fully healed. She didn't press further. The stallion shifted beneath them, and Matthias gave the reins a gentle nudge. "We're close. My cabin is just past the next ridge." They rode on, following a sloping trail that curved along a rocky ledge. A small wooden bridge appeared ahead, its planks old but sturdy, crossing a narrow stream that sparkled under the moonlight. As they crossed, Verity dipped her head in wonder. The water was so clear she could see smooth stones on the bottom glimmer like coins. The temperature dropped as they climbed the final hill. Matthias felt Verity shiver and immediately pulled the coat tighter around her shoulders. "Almost there," he murmured, leaning in just enough so she could hear the warmth in his voice. She nodded, pressing her fingers into the soft fur of the coat. "I never thought someone like you existed," she said. "Someone who listens." Matthias didn't respond immediately. When he finally did, his words were quiet. "Most people talk too much to hear anything worth listening to." They crested the hill, and there, nestled against a stand of tall pines, was his cabin. Warm light glowed from the windows, flickering softly. Smoke drifted lazily from a stone chimney. To one side stood a corral with 2 horses, and beyond it raised beds of vegetables, a small chicken coop, and stacks of chopped firewood. The place looked lived in, cared for, and strangely welcoming. Verity's breath caught. "It's beautiful." Matthias's tone softened in a way she hadn't heard before. "It's home." And as the horse descended the final slope, Verity Winters, still wrapped in the coat of a man she'd met less than an hour ago, felt something she had never felt in all her 19 years. Hope. The cabin door swung open with a soft creak as Matthias guided Verity inside, one steady hand at her back, making sure she didn't stumble on the wooden threshold. Warmth enveloped her instantly, rich, comforting heat radiating from a stone hearth where a fire crackled steadily, its glow dancing along the pine log walls. Verity stopped just past the doorway, overwhelmed for a heartbeat. She had never stepped into a home that felt lived in, cared for, and safe. St. Mary's had always smelled of cold soup, damp linens, and resentment. Here, the air was thick with the comforting scent of cedar, burning oak, and something faintly sweet, maybe honey or cloves. Matthias moved past her, lighting an oil lamp on the table. Golden light filled the room, revealing the heart of his world. A sturdy wooden table with 2 chairs, both carved by hand. Shelves lined with jars of dried herbs, roots, and spices. A quilt folded neatly on a wooden bench. A row of books, worn, well-read, carefully kept. A small kitchen corner with copper pots hanging from hooks. And everything spotless, ordered, quietly dignified. "You can sit here," Matthias said gently, pulling out one of the chairs. "I'll get the fire hotter and find clean clothes." Verity sank onto the chair, still wrapped in the heavy coat. Her bare feet curled instinctively under its hem. She watched as Matthias knelt at the hearth, adding 2 logs and shifting the embers with practiced ease. The flames leapt higher, casting warm gold across his profile, sharp jawline, the curve of cheek partly hidden beneath his beard, the steady calm in the way he moved. She had never seen a man look strong without trying to appear intimidating. He simply was. "You'll find a wash basin behind that curtain," he said, rising and wiping his hands on a cloth. "There's warm water in the kettle. I'll get you something clean to wear. My sister's things should fit." Verity clasped the coat tighter. "Your sister?" Matthias hesitated for half a heartbeat. "Rebecca. She passed 5 years ago, but I kept her clothes. They should be comfortable for you." Emotion tightened Verity's chest. He was trusting her with something precious, something that still lived in the quiet sadness behind his eyes. "I'll take care of them," she whispered. "I know you will," he said simply. He disappeared into a side room. Verity heard the faint sound of a trunk opening, fabric shifting, then his footsteps returning. He set a folded dress, soft blue cotton, on the table beside her, along with a clean undershift and a knitted shawl. "These should keep you warm tonight. And shoes," he added, setting down a simple pair of leather flats. Rebecca favored soft soles, comfortable for working in the house. Verity blinked rapidly to keep her tears from spilling. "I don't know how to repay you." "You don't owe me anything," Matthias replied. "You deserved better than what happened to you. That's all." She swallowed hard. "May I wash before changing?" He nodded. "I'll stay out here. Take all the time you need." Behind the curtain, a small washing area held a wooden basin, a bar of lavender soap, and a pitcher of warm water. Verity undressed slowly, wincing at the cold, at the mud along her legs, at the bruises blooming near her hips, marks left by chores, by the careless shoves of the other girls, by a life of being treated like something less than human. She washed in silence, trying not to cry as the warm water loosened the tightness in her skin. When she slipped into Rebecca's dress and shawl, she felt a sense of gentleness she wasn't used to, a soft fabric hugging her waist, warm knit settling around her shoulders, shoes that didn't pinch. She looked into the small metal mirror on the wall. For the first time in years, she didn't see a fat girl. She saw a girl who looked normal, maybe even, though she hardly dared think it, soft in a way that wasn't ugly. When she stepped out, Matthias had set the table. 2 wooden plates, sliced bread, a small pot bubbling gently over the fire, filling the room with a savory smell, herbs, onions, tender meat. He looked up as she entered. Something softened in his expression, a tiny, quiet warmth like the first light of dawn. "Rebecca's dress suits you." Verity flushed. "Thank you. It's beautiful." He gestured to the table. "Sit. You need a proper meal." She did. Matthias served her a large portion before taking a smaller one for himself. Verity stared at the generous helping, hesitating. I shouldn't eat so much," she whispered. "They said it makes me look worse, that girls like me shouldn't—" Matthias's voice cut in, firm but not unkind. "Verity, those girls starve themselves to chase an image they think the world owes them. But I've never known anyone to survive on cruelty and vanity." He nudged the bowl closer. "You've worked harder than any of them. Don't shame yourself for needing food." Her throat tightened. She lifted a spoonful, tasted the soup, and warmth bloomed through her chest. Rich broth, tender meat, carrots sweetened by long simmering. She hadn't tasted anything like it since before her parents died. Matthias ate quietly, glancing at her now and then, not staring, just checking she was all right. When she nearly choked on a tear that slipped down her throat, he passed her a clean handkerchief without a word. After the meal, he gestured toward the hearth where a thick quilt lay folded. "You should warm yourself a bit longer. I'll prepare the spare room." Verity sank onto the bench near the fire. The heat soaked into the soles of her borrowed shoes, into the ache deep in her bones. Matthias moved around the cabin, lighting another lamp, adjusting blankets, setting out more wood. He worked with a quiet grace that made the space feel even safer. When he finished, he returned to the hearth and sat, not too close, but close enough that she felt his presence like a shield against the world outside. "Verity," he said after a moment, voice lower than before, "what they did to you, it won't happen again, not while you're here, not while I'm alive." Her hands trembled. No one had ever promised her protection, not once. She met his eyes, shimmering in the firelight. Why are you so kind to me?" He held her gaze for a long moment. "Because I know what it is to lose everything," he said softly, "and I know what it is to be left alone in the dark." Her breath hitched. With the flames crackling behind them, with the mountain night curled around the cabin like a silent guardian, she felt something shift, something delicate, something new. Trust, the first thread binding her to a man who had no reason to help her except that he cared. The next morning dawned gray and cool, a thin veil of mist curling through the pines outside the cabin windows. Verity woke slowly beneath the soft quilt Matthias had laid across her the night before. For a moment she simply lay there, inhaling the faint scent of cedar logs and mountain air drifting in through the cracked window. It was the most peaceful sleep she'd had in years. She sat up, smoothing the blue dress Matthias had given her, then hesitated at the sound of footsteps outside, deep, steady, purposeful. His. Verity opened the door cautiously. Matthias stood on the porch, splitting logs with easy, practiced swings of his axe. Frosted breath puffed from his lips. Muscles flexed beneath his shirt as he lifted each piece of wood, stacking them neatly beside the cabin door. He turned as soon as he heard her step outside. "Morning," he said, voice rough with the chill. "Did you sleep all right?" She nodded. "Better than I ever have." "Good." He wiped his hands on a cloth. "There's warm bread and tea on the table. Eat while I take care of the animals." She hesitated. "Is there anything I can help with?" His eyes flickered with something, surprise, maybe gratitude. "If you're up to it, you can gather eggs. But don't push yourself. Yesterday was a hard day." Yesterday. Verity flinched at the memory of the girls laughing, the mud on her ruined dress, her bare skin burning with shame. But she swallowed it down. "I can do that." The chicken coop was small but tidy, and the hens clucked softly as she entered. It felt strangely comforting. Gentle, rhythmic work that required no explanations and offered no jeers. When she returned with a small basket, Matthias paused mid-swing and gave a quiet nod of approval. "You're quick," he said. "Rebecca used to take twice as long." Verity's heart squeezed. "I don't want to replace her. "You're not replacing anyone," he said gently. "You're helping, that's all." Inside the cabin, Matthias poured tea, while Verity cut the warm loaf he'd baked before dawn. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the fire crackling softly. But as the quiet settled, Verity noticed something in him, a heaviness beneath the calm, a thought lingering behind his eyes. Finally, she spoke. "Matthias, last night, when you said you knew what it was like to lose everything, what did you mean?" He set down his cup slowly, fingers curling around the handle for a moment as though deciding whether to let the truth out. "I lost my family," he said, "all of them. My father to a hunting accident, my mother to a fever. Rebecca, she died in a river crossing during a storm." His jaw clenched. "I couldn't save her." Verity felt the weight of his grief settle between them like a fragile bird. "I'm so sorry." He gave a curt nod. "Since then, I've tried to keep to myself. The mountain is quiet, predictable. People are not. But you still help them," she said softly. "You helped me." His eyes lifted. "You were in real danger. Any decent man would have—" "No," she said. "Most wouldn't. Not for someone like me." Matthias's gaze hardened, not at her, but at the cruelty she'd endured. "They had no right to treat you that way. But I intend to see that they face consequences." Verity stiffened. "Please don't confront them." "I'm not letting them continue," he said quietly. "This won't be brushed aside." She looked at her hands, twisting the edge of Rebecca's shawl. "They'll say I deserved it. They always do." His voice softened. "Do you believe them?" She blinked up at him, startled. "No, not anymore. Not after yesterday." "Good," he murmured, "because I don't tolerate lies, especially the kind you've been taught to tell yourself." A silence settled between them, heavier but warmer somehow, full of things unspoken. Then came a sharp knock at the cabin door. Matthias rose instantly, every line of him sharpening. He wasn't a man easily startled, but the tension in his shoulders spoke volumes. He opened the door to find Sheriff Wallace standing on the porch, broad, sunburned and frowning beneath his mustache. "Morning, Ironwood." The sheriff tipped his hat. "Got a complaint from St. Mary's this morning. 5 girls came crying into town saying you assaulted them." Verity gasped. "What?" Matthias didn't flinch. "I didn't lay a hand on them." The sheriff held up a hand. "Easy. I didn't say I believed them, but they're powerful families in town. Millicent Ashford's father is stirring up trouble at the saloon." Matthias's jaw tightened. "They stole this girl's clothes and left her naked in the woods, humiliated her, endangered her. That's the truth." Sheriff Wallace glanced at Verity, eyes softening with paternal concern. "That true, miss?" Verity nodded, voice trembling. "Yes, sir." Matthias stepped slightly in front of her without thinking, a silent shield. The sheriff grunted. "I figured something like that. Those girls have caused more trouble than they're worth since their families lost money in the drought." He rubbed his chin. "Ironwood, you know I gotta keep peace in town, but if you want justice, you'll need a witness." Verity paled. "No one at the camp will defend me. They all hate me." Matthias looked down at her. "Not all. There might be someone." She frowned. "Who?" "Mother Agnes," he said. "She was always fair to Rebecca. She won't side with bullies." The sheriff exhaled. "Best to clear this before the Ashfords twist the story further. I'll give you until tomorrow to gather what you need." He paused. "And Ironwood, watch your back. Old man Ashford's been buying drinks for every gunslick in town." After he left, the door shut with a heavy thud. Matthias turned to Verity, eyes steady. "You're not going back alone. We'll go together. And if they try anything—" "Matthias," her voice cracked, I don't want you hurt because of me." He stepped closer, lowering his head to meet her gaze. "Verity, listen carefully. Nothing they do will ever make me regret helping you." Her breath caught. "And no one," he continued softly, "is going to drag you back into that life. Not while I stand." Verity felt something bloom deep in her chest. Fragile, trembling, powerful. Belief in him, in herself, in a future she had never dared imagine. The next morning, frost clung to the grass like thin shards of glass. Verity stood beside Matthias's horse, fingers twisting nervously in the shawl he'd wrapped around her shoulders. The air hung heavy with the warning Sheriff Wallace had delivered the day before, but Matthias looked as immovable as the pines around them. "Stay close to me," he said as he lifted her onto the saddle. "No matter what they say, no matter who shows up, you're not standing alone." She nodded, heart hammering. "I trust you." Matthias mounted behind her, his hand steady at her waist as they rode toward St. Mary's relief camp. The sun was barely cresting the ridge when the wooden buildings of the camp came into view. Weathered cabins, a small chapel, and a muddy yard where chores were done. Word traveled fast. Before Matthias and Verity even reached the main path, girls clustered in doorways, whispering behind hands, eyes widening as they recognized Verity in Rebecca's blue dress. Then Millicent stepped out of the main hall with her 4 companions. She crossed her arms, chin high, every inch the princess she still pretended to be. "Well, well," Millicent sneered, "the fat girl grows bold, and what?" She flicked her gaze to Matthias. "Brings you here, Ironwood? Come to return damaged goods?" Verity flinched. Matthias dismounted in one swift, controlled movement. Then he turned and helped Verity down with a gentleness so deliberate that every girl watching froze. "Say that again," Matthias said quietly. A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. Millicent held her ground, but her smirk faltered. "I asked," Matthias repeated, stepping forward until the tip of his boots nearly touched hers, "if you wanted to repeat what you just called her." Prudence swallowed hard. Charlotte stepped back. Abigail's face went pale, but Millicent lifted her chin. "This is none of your business. She's a burden on all of us. We didn't do anything wrong." Matthias's jaw flexed. "You stole her clothes. You left her naked in the woods. You humiliated her, and you want to pretend that isn't wrong?" Millicent's voice sharpened. "We were teaching her a lesson. She should be grateful we gave her any attention at all." Verity's breath caught. Matthias exhaled slowly, dangerously. Enough. He turned toward Mother Agnes, who had stepped out of the chapel when she heard the commotion. The older woman looked between Verity and the girls, eyes narrowing with disappointment. "Girls," she said, voice stern, "tell me the truth. Did you steal her clothing?" Silence. A long, trembling silence. Then Constance broke first. "We only meant to scare her," she cried. "Millicent said it was harmless fun." Mother Agnes's expression darkened. "Fun?" Charlotte cracked next. "She acts like she's better than us." Verity blinked. "I never—" "You breathe too loud," Prudence snapped. "You take too much space, too much food, too much everything." The words hit Verity harder than she expected. Even now, Matthias stepped forward, voice low but razor sharp. "And that justifies stripping a girl and leaving her to freeze?" The girls fell silent. Mother Agnes turned back to Millicent. "Is this true?" Millicent's lip curled. "Fine. Yes, I did it. But she deserved worse." Matthias moved. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply reached out and took the front of Millicent's dress between his fingers, pulling her forward until she had no choice but to look up at him. "You will never touch her again," he said softly, coldly. "You or anyone else." Mother Agnes stepped in quickly. "That's enough, Matthias. Let her go." He did, but not before his message was clear. Mother Agnes turned to the group. "Millicent Ashford, Prudence Hale, Charlotte Green, Abigail Finch, Constance Burton, pack your things. You're dismissed from St. Mary's effective immediately." Gasps broke out. The girls reeled backward in disbelief. "You can't do that," Millicent shrieked. "I just did," Mother Agnes replied. "Your cruelty ends now." Millicent pointed furiously at Verity. "This is your fault. You think he'll protect you forever? Just wait. My father is coming, and he won't come alone." A tremor ran through Verity, but Matthias stepped beside her, his hand resting gently at her back. "Let him come," he said. "Let any of them come." He leaned down, his voice a quiet promise meant only for Verity. "They'll have to go through me first." The wind picked up as Matthias and Verity rode back toward the mountains, carrying with it the bitter echo of Millicent's threat. Verity clung to the saddle horn, heart hammering. Every rustle in the trees made her flinch. Every crack of a branch felt like danger closing in. Matthias noticed. "You're safe," he said quietly behind her, his hand steady at her waist. "No one touches you while I'm here." But Verity swallowed hard. "Millicent's father, he's powerful. He'll twist the truth. He'll say awful things about me, about you." Matthias exhaled through his nose, slow, unbothered. "I've dealt with men like him before. Money can buy guns, noise, and lies, but it can't buy strength or justice." She didn't argue, though fear still curled in her stomach. By the time they reached the cabin, dusk was settling. Matthias helped her down from the horse, then stepped away to scan the tree line, eyes narrowed. He wasn't a man given to paranoia, but tonight he was on guard. Inside, Verity tried to help prepare supper, but her hand shook too badly to cut vegetables. Matthias noticed and took the knife gently from her fingers. "Sit," he murmured. "Let me." She obeyed. The fire burned low. The air felt heavy, tense. Verity watched Matthias's broad shoulders as he moved through the kitchen with controlled precision. He was calm, but not relaxed. He was preparing for something. Just as the stew began to simmer, hoofbeats thundered up the ridge. Not one horse, not two, several. Verity froze. Matthias set down the ladle with deadly quiet. Then he reached for his rifle, leaning against the wall. "Stay behind me," he said. The hoofbeats drew closer, loud, angry, unsteady. Men shouting. One voice, sharp and slurred with drink, rose above the rest. "Ironwood, bring out the fat girl you're hiding. You've got something that belongs to me." Verity's blood turned to ice. Mr. Ashford. Matthias opened the cabin door slowly and stepped onto the porch, placing himself like a shield in the doorway. Verity stood just behind him, fingers gripping the edge of his coat. 5 men waited in the clearing, horses stamping, guns glinting in the fading light. Mr. Ashford sat in front, red-faced and furious, a whiskey bottle hanging from one hand. "You think you can ruin my daughter's reputation," he roared. "That pig humiliated Millicent. She'll pay for it." Matthias didn't flinch. "Your daughter humiliated herself." Ashford's eyes bulged. "Hand the girl over. Now, she works for my daughter. She answers to me." Matthias's voice dropped into something cold and unmistakably lethal. "She answers to no one but herself." A murmur rippled through the men. Ashford spat on the ground. You always thought you were better than us, living up here like some mountain king. But you're alone, and we're 5. Matthias cocked the rifle. You're 5 men with whiskey. I'm 1 man with a clear head. Don't test the difference. Ashford snarled and pointed at Verity. Girl, come here. You belong to us. Verity stepped back instinctively, but Matthias moved sideways, blocking her completely with his body. You'll speak to me, he said, not her. For the first time, silence swept the clearing. Ashford's voice wavered. She's nothing, just a burden, a useless fat. Matthias raised the rifle, not aimed, but ready. Finish that sentence, and I promise you won't like the end. The other men shifted nervously. One nudged Ashford's arm. Maybe we should leave this be, sir. Ironwood's right. This is bad ground. Ashford cursed, but he wasn't brave, just loud. The moment his men hesitated, his confidence cracked. You'll regret this, he barked, jerking his reins. Both of you! The group wheeled their horses and thundered back down the ridge, leaving only swirling dust and the echo of their retreat. Matthias lowered his rifle, breathing out slowly. Verity touched his sleeve, voice trembling. You stood in front of me. He turned to her, expression softening. I told you, he murmured. You're safe here. The wind settled. The danger faded with the last echo of hoofbeats, leaving only the crackling cabin fire and the soft night pressing gently against the windows. Verity sat near the hearth, Matthias settling a warm blanket over her shoulders as if anchoring her back into safety. He knelt beside her, voice low. You don't have to fear them anymore, not here. Her eyes filled, but not with the old kind of tears. These were different, lighter, trembling with something she had never dared to hope for. Is this really my home now? She whispered. Matthias met her gaze, steady and sure. If you'll have it. Where in the world are you listening from today? Your comments make these stories come alive. And if you still believe in love after everything you've been through, stay with me. The next story is waiting for you.